binding my skin to the joints. So there we are. So we have the joint system. We can go in pelvis right here. And we know how, for example, we select a certain hip, we can easily rotate it, but that doesn't mean the skin goes with it. So what we need to do is bind the skin to, or the mesh, or the model, whatever you call it, to my joints. That is really easy to do. I'm going to go in skin, smooth bind. I'm going to go into the options. I'm going to explain that for this purpose, and I'll explain it more and better when we paint skin weights. Means the next step will explain better what this interface is about. I want to have a max influence of 1 that is really important, as well as want the bind method to be closest distance, and I want to uncheck maintain maximum influences. And I'm going to say bind skin. Oops. One other thing I need to do though is I need to select both the joints and the skin. Sorry about that. And I'm going to say okay. So now the skin turns kind of like a magenta color to show you that is indeed a binding that has occurred. And in fact, if I take my hip joint, and you can see the skeleton turns into a beautiful rainbow color. And this time, if I take my left hip joint like I did earlier and I rotate it, I can see that my skin this time goes with it. And the same for my elbow. Obviously, I can go in here. Now it gets a little bit trickier now to select things. So again, you can obviously use the attribute editor, the outliner, or you can actually at times kind of hide your mesh and grab your joints and then go from there. But another thing I want to tell you in this case is that even though we did our binding and everything looks pretty peachy, if I grab on this shoulder, in fact, let me go and grab the shoulder. Sorry, guys. Left clavicle. There we are, left shoulder. If I grab on the left shoulder and I start moving it, you guys notice what's happening here, guys, right? That means the part of my mesh is actually being affected to go up with the arm. And the reason why is because with smooth bind, you have a situation in which your vertices have a weight based on which joint influence those vertices. And the weight is from 0, the minimum weight that they can have, to 1, that is the maximum weight. And you'll see when I go into this interface called painting weights, means there will be at times, like in this case, that you realize that the weights are wrong, like in this case in which I rotate my arm and this part of the skin moves up with it. That means obviously this joint is influencing these vertices too much. These vertices have too much weight, and the weight needs to be redistributed. So remember, the maximum for each vertex is 1 and the minimum is 0. 1 is actually white, is indicated with white, and 0 with black when we go in the next interface. And you say, what's the next interface? Is basically the painting weights interface. So what I need to do at a certain point is I need to select my mesh, and I need to go under skin and under painting weights. Let me find it right here, painting weights tool. And I'm actually going to go into the box right here, and I'm going to close at this point the outliner. So I'm going to go first in here, right here. So I went into this button that gives me the 3 views right there instead of having all of them. And what I can do obviously is go in the perspective one and hit spacebar. And it shows you right here, for example, because I have the pelvis selected, what's the weights in that area. And it's showing me that this joint, I told you the white means maximum, influences maximally in a maximal way all these white. So everything that you see white is basically 100% influenced. Everything that you see black is 0%, and the gray is obviously in between. Now, how do I redistribute? Do you guys see here I have a beautiful little brush that allows me to change things, but let's go actually in the shoulder. Sorry, I'm going to find the shoulder. There it is. I think the shoulder is what I was painting earlier. There it is. And you can see the problem right here. The shoulder weights, you know, the shoulder is affecting all this, that is fine, but it's also affecting this area. That is why when I move, I rotate my shoulder up, this goes with it. So what is kind of important is you can see right here that you have different ways to act. One is to paint by adding, and one is to paint by replacing. The painting by replacing weights is a little bit dangerous, because if you go in and try to replace here, you might end up, you know, what you're doing is you might end up increasing. Let's say that this, instead of being 100% or a full one, is 70% affected. And if you go in here and the value says 1 and you start painting, what you're doing is you're replacing that 70% with 100%. So you're doing actually a little bit more damage, and that's not helpful. And also oftentimes it kind of, you know, it's not a good thing to add. It tends to be, to replace, because it tends to, you know, you don't know exactly, since this joint is going to be changing, the weight that you're replacing onto this joint, where is exactly going. So what I tend to do is I tend to, instead of using replace, and it can be used, don't take me wrong, in fact, it can be used, and you can say, I want to only replace with a value of 0.2, for example. What I tend to do is I tend to add quite often. So add means that in order to remove from this area, what I might want to do is I might want to add to this area. That means if I add influence into these vertices, it has to remove it from somewhere else, that oftentimes is the area where it's problematic. Now remember, you can hit B and change the size of the brush. Sorry, another thing I want to show you, I apologize that I didn't tell you, is that down here you have something called use color ramp, in which instead of using just black and white, you also show with red, orange, yellow, green, and blue which the influence is. Now if you uncheck that, what it simply is going to do is going to give you the black and white. That is totally fine as well. So here I want to maybe increase, you know, my weight. And in a way, let's actually go in the replace option and put a really small value. But what basically, this is actually a very time-consuming process, so I don't want to stay here too much. As you can see, I just, by changing it here, I kind of removed that black area. I cannot stay too much because this class is so brief. We have only 2 hours together. And sometimes it takes 2 hours to really do proper painting weights. What I want you to know in this interface mostly is that each of these joints have an influence on the mesh. And what you have to do is go joint by joint at times and make sure it works, the influence is proper. Another way to do it is by going joint by joint before you're inside of this interface and actually rotate your joints and see if any of the mesh of the skin is actually being affected, is being affected in a negative way, like we just, you know, found out earlier with my shoulder, that when I rotated the shoulder, I could see that part of the torso was going with it. So what is very important to understand, that here, joint by joint, like as you can see, this is the neck joint, I can basically I can change my weights, or how the joints are influencing the mesh or are influencing the vertices. And keep always in mind that the vertex has a maximum 1 and a minimum of 0. And 1 is 100% is white, the 0 is black, and every time you see gray is pretty much in between. So that's what the process of painting weights is, and I cannot really go too much more in depth. It's pretty actually straightforward. As you can see, is you go through the list and every joint will have an effect on the vertices, and at times you'll have to go in and redistribute that value on the vertices. Mainly, as I said, I recommend you use the add, or if you use the replace, you use the replace with a very, very small value. So because anything that you replace, anything you take off from a vertex is going to be moved to the neighboring vertices. That at times is a bit of a dangerous step, because you don't really know how much is going to be added.